Welcome everybody. My name is Noah Chrisman and I'm SPUR's Director of Public Programming. Thank you so much for tuning into this digital discourse today. So if you're not familiar with SPUR, we are a member-supported nonprofit organization that puts ideas and action together to make for a better city and a better region. If you're not a member, I do encourage you to join to sustain our ongoing work in making our cities and our region more prosperous, sustainable, and equitable places to live. You can find more information to do that online at spur.org/join. So as we all know, next week is Thanksgiving, so we don't have any programming happening then. So our next digital discourse is scheduled for Monday, November 30th at 5 p.m. It's called Phasing Out Fossil Fuels in Bay Area Buildings. So California has declared a goal of being carbon neutral by 2045, but the state has lagged a little on enacting the necessary regulatory changes. So here in the Bay Area, some cities are picking up the slack. Come on that Monday, the 30th, to hear from leading electrification ordinances in San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, as well as advocates working on state policy as they discuss how the Bay Area is moving building electrification policy forward. But today we're talking about the future of transportation here in California. So California has countless miles of roads and innumerable public transportation systems moving its nearly 40 million residents around the state. While no single agency exclusively determines the state's transportation future, the California Department of Transportation, or as we know it, Caltrans, comes close. The department manages more than 50,000 miles of highway and freeway lanes across the state, as well as intercity rail services, permitting for more than 400 public use airports and much, much more. In 2019, Tokso Mishakan was appointed director of Caltrans. In that role, Director Mishakan has been working to create a safe, sustainable, and multimodal state transportation system that prioritizes local communities and relies on local partnerships. This afternoon, or this evening, we'll be talking with Director Omishakin about what it will take to achieve his long-term mobility, equity, and climate goals and build a transportation system that works for all. And I do want to thank the Bay Area Council, Seamless Bay Area, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, Transform, and the Vision Zero Network for joining us today and for their help in promoting this conversation. Finally, today's digital discourse has been generously sponsored by Uber. So I want to hand it over to Chris Pangilinan, who's the head of global policy for public transportation at Uber, to introduce our panelists. Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Noah, for having us. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Uber is pleased to be a sponsor of the great work that SPUR is engaged in to make transportation in the Bay Area more equitable and environmentally sustainable. And I'm particularly interested and excited by tonight's topic, which is examining the future of transportation in California, given the crossroads we now sit at, given concerning the new presidential administration coming in, the environment at the forefront of all of our concerns, changes in technology, and of course, how we recover from this ongoing COVID crisis. So tonight's program will be a conversation between Nick Josefowicz, SPUR's Chief of Policy, and Caltrans Director Tokso Omishakin. And let me introduce the two of them here before we get started. So Nick Josefowicz is currently the Chief Policy Officer at SPUR. Nick manages SPUR's policy team, responsible for developing and advancing powerful policy ideas across the Bay Area. Previously, Nick founded and ran a solar energy development company and served as a BART director, where he led efforts to pass and issue a $3.5 billion infrastructure bond, transition BART to 100% renewable power, and pass state legislation to enable new housing at BART stations. He is currently a commissioner for the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. Tokso Omishakin was appointed the 33rd director of the California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, by Governor Gavin Newsom and sworn in October of 2019. As director, he manages a $15 billion budget and nearly 21,000 employees who oversee 50,000 lane miles of highways, maintain 13 bridges, provide permitting for more than 400 public use airports, fund 3 of Amtrak's busiest intercity light rail services, and provide transit support to more than 200 local and regional transit agencies. Very busy man, if I must say. There will be time at the end of tonight's conversation to hear from the audience. So I encourage you to submit any questions that you may have using the Q&A panel at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick and Director Omishakin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you so much, Director, for joining us. When I told people that you were going to come and speak with us this evening, almost everybody had a story, which basically went like this. I was at a meeting where Toke said this, and I could not believe that a Caltrans director was saying what he just said. So you should know that you have like a sort of a fan club out here who's following you around. And one of the things that one of the things that Caltrans just released, which is obviously a sort of signature document, is the California Transportation Plan 2050. And so what do you see as the big changes in this plan from the last one? How are you sort of, how does that and how do they represent your priorities for Caltrans and the state?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Can you hear me clearly?
Perfectly.
Good. Thanks for having me on, first of all. Really appreciate the opportunity. Excited to have this conversation with SPUR. It's good to, over the last couple of days, I've learned a little bit more. Staff's been briefing me about what you guys do. It's pretty exciting work and very meaningful and impactful work. So thanks for everything that you do, and thanks to Uber as well, Chris, for being a sponsor of the discussion tonight. So really glad to be a part of this. So, first thing I'll say about the plan, it's called CTP 2050. You can find a draft of it online. We've sought public comment on it already. But what's really unique about it is, I would say there are two elements that are really important. But what I really want to be different at the end of the day is that I want the plan, I want the document to be a living plan that this DOT actually uses to influence how we do our work within the department. And if there's one criticism for planning and for planners in general, it's the fact that organizations like yours, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, Nick, is that plan's collecting dust. I worked for the Tennessee DOT for 8 years as the deputy director. We call them deputy commissioner. I worked there for 8 years, and look, we had some great plans, but actually living those plans, like it influencing how we actually utilize resources, that was a bit of a challenge. And so I want that to be different here as we move forward. But two key things to your question that I think are different. One is the focus, just a blatant focus on climate and understanding the fact that we have in this sector, we have a big role to play. And more than the last plan that was done, CTP 2040, we go in a little bit deeper on climate change related issues and our role and what we could be doing and what we should be doing. And the other part that is truly unique and different for state DOT, and it's changing a little bit across the country, is the focus on equity and the fact that we are admitting and agreeing and supporting the fact that not only do we play a role in equity moving forward, but that we've played a role in the past that can't be regarded in many parts as good when it comes to this issue. And so we're embracing that past and that history and recognizing where we are today and where we need to go moving forward. And we can talk about that a little bit more in detail as well.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that, because the governor has clearly made transportation emissions a priority. It's been the subject of 2 of his most high-profile executive orders. And Caltrans, as you've kind of alluded to, has not traditionally been the place you go to in state government when you're looking for a really climate-forward agenda or a climate justice-focused agenda. How are you going to be able to kind of make this a living document, kind of take some of the climate ideas that are put forward in CTP 2050 and actually implement them in our state's transportation network?
So, I really don't think we have a choice, Nick. I don't think we can in any way sit back on this issue. I mean, we've seen what's happened this year with more than 4 million acres burning in the state. And we know, a lot of us know the numbers already. You're talking nearly 50% of the GHG emissions in the state come from our sector, the sector that we oversee. The bottom line number is 40%, but it goes up another 10% when you account for fuel production in the state. So 50% of GHG is from us. But I'll start, like you said, Nick, by commending the administration, commending the governor first, since he's been in office during 2 consecutive climate weeks. Last year, 2019, N1919, an executive order. This year, N7920. Executive orders are saying, look, as a state, here's the North Star. Here's where we need to be going. And with us being 50% of the GHG in the state, we obviously play a key role in that. Look, at the end of the day, I think it's important to note that Caltrans is not the sole proprietor of transportation in the state. You have cities, you have self-help counties, county governments, you have NPOs. At the state level, you have CalSTA, CTC. I mean, there are multiple, cooks in the kitchen, if you will. But the decisions we're making within the department related to our resources and policy, they're very much in alignment with, including this new long-range plan. They're very much in alignment with the direction the governor has taken the state with these executive orders. So I think we're taking those steps. You're right that an organization, most state DOTs, not just Caltrans, most state DOTs don't have a reputation that is known for supporting a robust climate agenda. But we're taking a different approach in this, and I can go into detail on some of the things that we're doing. But at 50% of the challenge, we can't afford to sit back.
Yeah, and it's great to hear you say that. And the organizations that are sort of co-hosting this event, Bay Area Council, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, Transform, Seamless Bay Area, Vision Zero Network. One of the things that we've all worked on together in one way or another is equitable road pricing, whether it's express lanes here in the Bay Area or toll increases on our state-owned bridges or congestion pricing. And that in the state transportation plan, that's basically the kind of number one, if I'm reading it right, strategy to kind of reduce climate emissions, or one of the number one strategies. And it's also features in, now in SANDAGs and SCAGs and SACOGs and soon to be MTCs, sustainable community strategy. What do you see as the kind of the chances of actually being able to deliver sort of really equitable road pricing at the scale that we need to kind of really get the kind of climate benefits from it, as well as all the economic and congestion and equity benefits?
Well, that's a lot there, Nick, that you're asking, but I'll try to sort of dissect those and go through those a little bit. Number one, to be clear, congestion pricing is one of several tools. I wouldn't necessarily say it's ahead of some other things that we're pushing. I think the number one thing we need to do to improve mobility in this state, especially from an equity standpoint and a climate standpoint, is to provide people more choices. That's the bottom line. We need to invest more in rail. We need to invest more in bus transit. We need to invest more in walking, biking opportunities. No doubt, congestion pricing and managed lanes are a key part of that. I'm a little surprised that, and just being frank, I'm a little surprised at the history that Caltrans has with congestion pricing. We haven't really played as significant a role as some other state DOTs have played around the country. We've kind of been in the back, and the self-help counties and regional governments have played a stronger role. I think we should be more active in this space. And from an equity standpoint, it's a challenge. But I think one of the things that we lose sight of often in this discussion in our efforts is if we do it right and we improve opportunities for transit as well, especially bus transit, you're providing a more equitable solution when you do that. I think we get so focused on how much the cost is, how much the total cost will be, the pricing will be, but let's not forget about our opportunity to get more capacity for transit, bus transit, and how that can be an equitable solution when we invest more in managed lanes solutions.
Absolutely, and the SPUR's worked a lot with Transform, who've produced this phenomenal report, which I'm going to butcher the name of. I think it's Pricing Roads, Advancing Equity, about how to do it equitably, and reinvesting in bus transit is just a key element. And Caltrans hasn't often taken a leadership role in transit either. And maybe a lot of these questions are going to follow the same theme, but that's okay. Like, you have a transit division. How do you? But you do have a transit division. So how do you envision kind of Caltrans' relationship with transit changing over the next few years, and sort of really acting as a way to promote and shape it?
So are you saying, Nick, that this is just going to be a Caltrans bashing session? Is that what this guy?
No, this is a holding up it's sort of reflecting on how far we've come already under your brief leadership.
I'm joking. No, I'm just no, I think it's a good point. I will say that again, that this is not something that what you're describing as far as that transit division, it's not something that just plagues a department like ours or other or department like ours, because I've experienced this in other states where the transit division essentially functions as a group that administers a bunch of federal and state grants and nothing else. It's like, okay, we got the 5103, 5703 grant from FTA, and we want to make sure all the transit agencies get it, and they do what they say they're going to do. Our team, the team that's in place now, the leadership there, Cal and Jeannie Wardwalla, who a lot of people probably know, they're focused on a different level than any part of that, than any recent part of the history of that division. I'll tell you that beyond administering grants and doing the usual, the planning efforts are taking off. They're going to take off more. One of the responsibilities they have is the state rail plan, both looking at both freight and passenger issues. So planning unlike ever before. The part of what needs to happen there at some point, though, is beyond just looking at things from a state level, is how does that group get to a more micro level and work with local governments as well on planning efforts, so that we're not just looking at it from 30,000 feet, but going down and working with smaller transit agencies and helping them coordinate their planning efforts so that it matches the bigger vision and bigger goals for the state. So because you notice, Nick, we've got over 300 transit agencies in the state. That's a lot. You've got an English background. There are 56 million people that live in England.
Yeah,
I guarantee you, outside of London, outside of the core of London, where they're not more than a dozen other major transit agencies in the entire country, and we have 300 in a state of 40 million people. But that's a bit of the challenge for us as far as the work that the division does. But I'll say one other thing real quick about this. Some of the work that they're doing. There's something called Cal ITP that a lot of people may not be familiar with yet, but they'll become more familiar with in the coming months. And it's an effort to make the paying for transit as seamless as possible, a more coordinated, seamless way to pay for transit. And it's being led by our transit group in coordination with CalSTA, the governor's office, and many other people. But there are a lot of benefits that will come from Cal ITP. If you haven't found out about it, you can do it for it. But everything from trip planning to contactless pay, making payment better, to equity, those are all benefits that will come out of this effort with Cal ITP. And again, being led by the transit division. So we're not your dad's old transit division, Nick.
That's awesome. And we Jillian Gillette, who was the San Francisco Mayor's transportation advisor, was someone we got to know here in the Bay Area really well. And she's doing amazing work in ITP. And we've had the benefit of hearing her at a SPUR panel. Do you think that part of the transit division's work would involve sort of thinking about, like, sort of putting together a more aggressive strategy for using kind of our state highway system as like a kind of and as a right of way for express bus service, and thinking about sort of what are the changes that need to be made to really allow us to prioritize right of way on our highways, whether it's shoulders or existing lanes, for sort of robust express bus service in different parts of the state.
Yeah. So, by the way, Jillian, we're glad to steal her away from the Bay. She still lives there, but she's been doing great work for us. So I'm happy Jillian's she's leading that work really into Cal ITP. Glad she's been on with you guys before. To your question, those are the kind of boundaries that state DOTs traditionally don't like to push against, that we're pushing against, and we're open to those types of discussions. Is how to explore, using what are temporary or long-term existing right-of-way, existing lanes for dedicated bus service. I know you guys know Jeff Tomlin well. They're in the city and the region. Actually have a conversation with Jeff and his team about this very issue, exploring more opportunities for that. I think we have to be open. If we're going to get where we need to get to, Nick, we can't. Our solutions just can't be focused on increasing capacity through individual vehicles, through vehicles. We have to put on the table transit solutions that are not the traditional ones. Walking, biking opportunities as well. So I'm all game for it. Our district director, who is leaving, Tony Tavares, and he's headed to LA. He's jumping from one hot pan to another hot pan. He's done a very good job of opening things up in that sense in the Bay Area over the last 2 years that he's led the district.
Tony's been great. We're going to be sad to miss him, but he set a high bar, so I'm sure you're going to be able to kind of find a replacement who's just as forward-thinking.
Big news, Phil, for whoever's coming next.
So you talked about sort of, and when you talk, you're in the type of audience where people put hallelujah in the chat, and they're not talking about my question, they're not responding to my questions. So talking about active transportation and the role that biking and walking plays, and you can't sort of disassociate that conversation with safety and how there are tens of thousands of Californians that are seriously injured on our roads every year, and the role that speed plays in sort of creating safe environments for people to walk and bike. And in the state transportation plan, it calls for the draft, it calls for eliminating the 85th percentile rule for setting speed limits, which is phenomenal because I'm a dad, and if I told my kids that they could do, the rule was they could do anything as long as 85% of the other people were doing it, we wouldn't have many rules. It doesn't take as a sort of as assertive a stance yet on automated speed enforcement. And I was just wondering if you could talk about kind of how you're thinking, like where you're sort of thinking about, how you're thinking about safety, and where you're thinking about kind of drawing the line for like what we need to do in this go round, and what might be a little bit too much to do in this round from a sort of safety and speed perspective.
This is a very important question. And by the way, on as far as automated speed enforcement and safety, and by the way, on the 85th percentile, I think what we've done with that as a guidance or regulation or policy for many years in this space is I think we've rewarded a lot of bad behavior. You said you're a dad, Nick. I would compare this to if you had two kids, and one of your kids always kept the room dirty, and one kept it clean. And the kid who keeps his room clean all the time, he says, "Look, I'm going to start cleaning my room because Buddy over here, my sibling, he never cleans his room, and nothing ever happens to him. So I'm just going to do what he does." So we're rewarding that behavior. Like, well, 85% of the people are doing this, so yeah, I should be able to do it too. I should just follow along. Anyway, I could get on a soapbox about that, but the other part to your question,
if you could figure out how to get my kid to keep his room clean, you can do whatever you want with the highways. Like, that would be the miracle. But
well, I've got that challenge too with my two buds. One does an excellent job, and the other one always points to the other one. So about their room not being clean. But on ASC, on automated speed enforcement, I think it's something that we need to embrace and start exploring more as well. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record here, just saying, yeah, let's try, let's do. But when you look at the challenge, when you look at the problem we have, in the last 4 weeks, Nick, we've lost 2 contractors that work for Caltrans. They've passed away in the last few weeks, within a span of a month. I had to call one of our Caltrans staff, so not a contractor, one of our Caltrans staff members 2 weeks ago in the LA area, who just left surgery, who had just made it home and was severely injured, pretty horrific injuries, and an accident where it was on a construction site, car not paying attention, knocked him 20 feet across the roadway. And we've lost 2 again. So there's been repeated cases in the last several weeks as it relates to safety. And when you think about the bigger issues we have in the state, 3,600 people by average die every year on our transportation system. The comparison I made earlier to England, you can make the same comparison here. In England, 56 million people, 1,700 fatalities on the transportation system every year, 1,700. California, 40 million people, 3,600 people. So double the amount of people. The people who are not in 2-ton vehicles, the most vulnerable users of the system, we've seen the highest increases over the last 5 years in that particular category than any other category. So people walking, biking, trying to get to access to transit. That's where the highest increases have been over the last 5 years, more than any other mode. So we need to put more tools in place. ASE, automated speed enforcement, is one of those things that has a lot of controversy around it, and privacy laws, and I don't want the government taking pictures of my license plate and me, and there are all kinds of issues there. It will need some legislative support to be able to actually happen. The law enforcement community is coming around on it more than ever before. My partners at the CHP are. I haven't had a chance to have a conversation with the new Commissioner Ray, about this specifically yet, but I did talk to Commissioner outgoing Stanley, about it a few times. So this is an area we're going to have to see, and look, we're going to have to probably pilot something. It's not probably we're not going to be able to do a huge rollout. Maybe construction sites, school zones, special areas where we can say, okay, now we have this in place. We need to manage this challenge but we can't normalize the numbers we have today and act like this is the way it's supposed to be. Because we're a big state, we're supposed to lose nearly 4,000 people using our transportation system. It doesn't make any sense.
It's so powerful to hear you talk about this, and so many people have been impacted, or their families have been impacted by traffic violence, and it's really not. It's great to hear you taking this so seriously, I wanted to sort of shift. These issues obviously have a deep equity component as well, because the most vulnerable road users are often the most vulnerable folks in our society. And I wanted to sort of ask specifically that you've created an Office of Race and Equity. I think you created it. It now exists. I'd love to hear more about what you envision the role of this office to be, and how you're working with other BIPOC transportation leaders to sort of shape transportation decision-making and funding issues that really addresses the needs of historically disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, so thanks, Nick. Another very important point that you're bringing up, and question that you're bringing up. I see part of my role here, part of my job is to create an environment within a department that great ideas can come to life. And I didn't come up with the idea of creating this office called CORE, Caltrans, right? Caltrans Office of Race and Equity. A team of people that have been working for years in a department on issues related to equity. And they said, look, we need to strengthen this and put some more energy behind it, and have more leadership play more of a role in it. And Rihanna Gordon, Jeannie Ward Waller, there are a bunch of people who came together and said, look, let's lean on Tokes and make him support this and buy into this. And I thought it was a great idea. But part of what I think happens a lot in the equity space, and I think it's changing this year, but part of what I think happens a lot, and a lot of people know this, is we give a lot of lip service to this stuff. And we sound good, and it gets pretty jazzy, and it's the adjective and whatever it is right now, it's the word of the year, But I get a little frustrated with it being a talking point and not a living point. And that's what I think it should be. This should be something we live by. This should be built into how we do everything we do. So not just a special office that's in one corner where some people say, yeah, this is our, it should be a part of a lens. If you're in public service, this should be the lens that you do your work through, period. Is understanding where people are in society and how you need to serve them at those different levels. That should be like bottom line, a part of your responsibility. But I get frustrated with just only symbolic measures. Those symbolic measures are important. I'll tell you some of the things that we're doing. Just real quickly, we're partnering with the California Natural Resources Agency and state parks to re-examine or to examine all state highways, parks, and monuments and facilities, buildings that may be named after figures that have a negative past when it comes to race and racism. And we're going to see whether or not we need to change those names of those buildings and monuments and streets and parks, et cetera. So I think those are important steps, symbolic steps for us to be taken. And I know there's no other state in the country than ours that will take a step, especially a DOT, to say, look, we're going to change XYZ street name, Christopher Columbus, to highway to this, or whatever it may be. So I think those are important. However, symbolic, the place we need to get to is where we're continuing to make decisions that are making a difference in people's lives in a very meaningful way. Not, that feels good. I'm glad, I'm happy that they changed something, but like, this is now impacting my life and having better life because of this decision that's being made.
Mhm.
So part of what this office's responsibility is going to be training and education, both internally, externally,
Mhm.
for us. Increased engagement, the community engagement, serve as the sort of the centerpiece, if you will, for engagement with communities, whether it be indigenous communities or um, African-American communities, Latino communities, be that centerpiece for Caltrans in those efforts. But I think it's important that we truly are listening in our efforts in this space. I'll say this, and I'll give it back to you, Nick. You know, we get pretty excited about steps to take and what we want to do and go run. But we need to really listen to people and listen to communities and really understand where they are. Not only communities, but internally as well. We're up to nearly 22,000 people that work for this department. I've had, over the last 2 months, I've had a series that's going on. It's not open to the public, it's internal. A series, an hour and a half long, called Conversations on Equity. So it's me and some other leaders in the department from different parts of the state who work for Caltrans. I had one of my leaders in the department, David DeLuce, mentioned the other day that, you know, we need to understand that people are in different places on this issue. Even though you and I can sit and talk about this, and it's pretty, we understand, like, yeah, we need to do more. We're not doing enough. Look, there are people who still don't understand this issue. And they're like, what are you talking about? Why do we need to be focused on equity? There are people who are probably in the middle, who are, spinning wheels a little bit and coming on board. And there are people probably like you and I who are like, all right, what's the next thing? Like, what do we got to do? Like, okay, what's the next policy item we need to take a bite off of to gain more ground? And so we need to be mindful that, and look, the Bay Area it's unique. It's probably in the state and the country, and its progressiveness on these issues. But you got to remember that other parts of the state were not so much on this stuff. And the listening part and training and education, I think we need to be mindful of before we take the actions that we so desperately want to move forward on.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to think of just the role that 22,000 Caltrans workers could play just as individuals in their communities in talking about these issues, in addition to the role they play as kind of agents of the state government in their kind of, working and decision-making capacity. And, one of the things that, like, I think has one of the decisions and actions that has had some of the most negative equity consequences or in the transportation spaces is urban freeways through Black and brown neighborhoods. And that legacy is still very much with us in the Bay Area and around California. How do you think about what the role that Caltrans can play in rectifying these injustices, restoring mobility options for communities that have been fragmented by freeways, or even sort of a plan of freeway removal, like we've done a little bit here in San Francisco, but from my perspective, not nearly enough?
Yeah, good question, Nick. So more of the same from me on this about being open to these types of ideas. And again, probably unique to to a lot of state DOTs, though I do know some state DOTs who have supported efforts like this. But I think important to note again is the training and education that a department like ours needs to have before we say, oh yeah, we'd be open to taking a freeway that has 85,000 vehicles on it or 200,000 vehicles on it. We'd be open to taking it down or doming it or capping it or whatever. Mm-hmm. When the incidents surrounding George Floyd happened on Memorial Day weekend this year, when he was brutally killed, one of the things, as the uprising was going on, one of the things that I was battling with as the protests started to pick up was, okay, Tokes, what do you do? Like, what is your role? I mean, do something. But you can't just sit there frustrated. Like, what are you going to do? And part of the place that I eventually came to, and I reached out to the leadership at the governor's office, and we talked about some things, and some of the things that we talked about are moving forward. But part of the place I eventually got to was, look, if you're in the financial industry, figure out something there. If you're in education, figure out what you need to do. If you're in law enforcement, what's your part? And just go down the list. And so I said, look, in transportation, what are some of the things that we need to be doing to address this challenge? And we know that this area is one of them because of the history you just mentioned. And what I decided to do was, look, I bet there are not a lot of people who understand this history within the department. They just felt like, oh, we built a lot of highways. It was getting people to where they need to go and commerce and goods to where they need to go. But I required our entire executive team, 30 people, to watch a documentary called Divided Highways. And another recommendation that was a part of it was segregated by design. So for the people listening or watching who haven't heard of these, you need to check both of these documentaries out. Divided Highways, it's on YouTube. I watched it 23 or 24 years ago when I was in grad school, planning school. And it goes through this long history of how highways were supposed to be this, savior of the country, and how it was going to mean all these great things related to national defense and commerce and connecting people and all the great things that were romanticized about building freeways. And the realization, by the 80s and 90s that, yeah, there was a lot of good that came out of it, but boy, look at the ton of bad as well. As far as the division and blight that it created in many minority communities across the country. So after we watched it, I think our team started to realize, boy, I mean, there are a lot of people, I'm not going to go into names and details, but there are a lot of people who are like, it was an eye opener. Like, I didn't know that what I was working on in the 1980s, that it was actually having this kind of impact. We went through NEPA, CEQA, all that stuff, but we had no idea that there was destruction being created in a lot of these communities because of these projects. And so there's a better realization and understanding of how highways have caused division in many communities. And we're more open and flexible than ever before, and understanding how we can play a role to reconnect communities through transportation infrastructure, especially around freeways and highways.
I want to make sure that we've got a lot of questions from the audience. I want to make sure that the audience knows that they should click on the Q&A button at the bottom and type in their questions, and I'll try and sort of synthesize and ask them. So one of the audience attendees asked a sort of slightly provocative question about highways. Will Caltrans commit to stop all highway widening projects at least in urban areas? So, I mean, you must get asked this type of question somewhat regularly, or maybe you get asked the opposite question. How can Caltrans commit to do way more highway widening projects in my community or whatever? But how would you answer that question about sort of, highway widening especially in urban areas, which is so relevant for the Bay Area?
No, I think it's a spot on question. I think it's a great question. If I had $1 for every time it came up in a day, I'd be a billionaire. Look, this is one of the issues that we've got to get a better handle on how we're addressing publicly. And I'm probably going to butcher my response to you on this, but I'm sure you're familiar with SB 743. SB 743 moves us away from making transportation investment and land use investment decisions based on, especially on the transportation side, based on LOS, level of service, to VMT, vehicle miles traveled. And there's been a lot of push and pull between us, people who are implementing 743, and organizations like OPR, my friend Kate Gording at OPR, and other key community stakeholders who want to build more freeways, and who their mere existence, the reason why they exist was because they got a measure passed that said, we'll raise revenue, we'll raise taxes to build a freeway. And now there are state laws, though 13 years old, that we're just now implementing, that says, yeah, you need to move away from that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't like my response on this, but the truth of the matter is, I don't think we can use a one-size-fits-all approach as we implement the law.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't believe that. I think in urban areas, building freeways and building, major highways, we should be absolutely done with that. I think the infrastructure we need in urban areas related to, as far as it relates to lane miles, I think we should be done. I really do believe that. I think we should be looking for other ways to improve capacity within the existing infrastructure we have. So we've already talked about it. Technology, using TISMO, transit, walking, biking opportunities, rail. That's where attention should be for the urban context. Now, for the more suburban or rural, especially context, there's still some connectivity projects that are important, or some key economic development corridor projects that are important, or some safety projects that are important. But we have to be careful at the same time. There's some safety projects, for example, there are two-lane highways in rural communities that people come to Caltrans and come to us and say, look, that 2-lane highway needs to be a 5-lane because there are too many serious injuries and fatalities there. And we almost kind of just fall in line and say, yeah, you're right, that needs to be 5. And I think we need to be careful to go from 2 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
I think 2 to 3 with a center turn lane with shoulders, but building out a 5-lane, I think we should be moving away from those kinds of designs, period. I think we should just be moving away from that. So I think highway expansion in rural areas where it helps achieve certain key goals like safety, improved connectivity for economic growth, especially in hard-hit rural areas. I think we should be open to those. Mm-hmm. But in the urban context, we should be done with building freeways.
Mm-hmm. And so in the urban context, on freeways, one of the things that we talk a lot about in the Bay Area is converting general purpose lanes to HOV lanes, as well as converting general purpose lanes to express lanes. And right now, it's you can't really do the big jump. You can't convert from general purpose all the way to express lanes, as you know, and there's limits in federal law, there's limits in also in sort of Caltrans interpretation of that. How do you think about that? Should we, is that something that you think we should be sort of moving towards, allowing kind of large scale conversions of general purpose lanes to more managed lanes? And it's something that features very prominently in MTC's Plan Bay Area 2050 draft, as an example.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm not going to give you a lengthy response on that one. I think we should be open to it. Is what I'll say, to explore the opportunities there. But I'm not going to tell you just outright that should be that should be the case, because you get into a tough rub as it relates to issues around equity. and balancing equity, because you got to make sure again that transit opportunities and pricing, especially if you're going to go to hot. If you're going to stay at HOV, possibly, that may be something that's palatable. But if you're gonna price this, if you're gonna go to tolling it, I got some concerns and thoughts about how that's carried out. So I'm not gonna give you a clear-cut answer on that, but should be open to exploring is what I would say.
Well, I'll put that on the list of my 1-point list of things that I need to convince you about over the next few years, because it is a centerpiece of MTC's sort of transit strategy, is to do those conversions. And but talking about
from a transit standpoint, Nick, totally on board. You got to think about equity and impact to existing GP lanes.
Absolutely, it is. Pricing is so dicey, and now I think one of the challenges that we often experience is that the status quo is pricing people out in ways that it's just not as explicit, and we can't forget that. And when we do pricing differently, we have an opportunity. When we do it more explicitly, we have an opportunity to kind of remedy some of those inequities in the current sort of pricing system and how we pay for mobility that is particularly beneficial to low-income communities. So it's a tough question. And I mean, related to transit and paying for it, and this another question from the audience. I mean, as well as anyone, transit is going through a world of financial hurt right now, and it is a huge priority for this region to sort of be able to find the funding to be able to continue running our transit service that is so sorely needed, especially in low-income communities. And in San Francisco, we got, and in Oakland and elsewhere, because of social distancing and reduced funding, just buses going by just full, not picking people up. And it's you just hate to see it. And it has such a profound impact on people's lives. What's the chance? I mean, do you think that there's the possibility of finding money that is going to sort of other transportation modes at the state level and kind of shifting it towards transit operations in a moment like this?
Yeah, that's another tough one, Nick, because I like your thinking there. I like the train of thought on the question from the person attending, but the solutions from a financial standpoint on this really are not something that a state could bear. I don't care what state it is. And look, we've got the strongest state economy of any state, the largest economy in the country. But when you think about it, we had a $20 billion surplus in February of this year as a state. We got a $50 billion goose egg right now. And Caltrans is facing, $400 million at the state level, facing a $400 million loss every year as it relates to transportation. So, I try not to get into politics too much and talk about parties and all that stuff, because I know we're kind of divided as a country right now. But one of the things that will be an upside nationally as things change in the next month and a half is that hopefully some kind of a recovery or stimulus bill is passed. But I think the incoming administration has pretty much signaled that transit's important to them. And airlines and transit, even though they've been given something already before, I've heard Jeff Tumlin say, CARES Act funding, the CARES Act dollars are about to run out soon. And I mean, not only is that going to mean that service is going to get cut, but people are going to lose their jobs as well. And an already stifled economy. So I think people underestimate how important transportation is to the quality of life in any community. If it's not strong, if it's weak and falling apart, the community is going to struggle. And so where I think we should be looking, and very hopeful, regardless of what happens in the Senate, that the House and Senate and the new administration can put forward some more dollars towards this. But this is not something that Caltrans can say, hey, we found 5 million, Bata, whoever it is, here goes a little muni, here goes a little cushion for you to support a little bit of your transit work. This is way bigger than that.
There's a lot of drawers in your office. There's no money in any of those drawers for Muni. Are you sure? I think maybe we were hoping. But in all seriousness, it is a, the MTC estimated that over the next 18 months, we have almost a $2.3 billion deficit for transit operations in the Bay Area. And, you're seeing, just dramatic cuts, and for all the reasons you said, it's existential, and it's there's a real growing movement led by a number of folks who we partner with regularly to try and find ways to kind of sort of look in all those drawers and not just hope that the federal government comes in and rides to our rescue, because we certainly hope they do, and we're working hard on that, but you sometimes can't rely on that. But I wanted to, we're getting to time, and I wanted to just really reiterate how grateful we are that you spend the evening with us. In the message of sort of Joe Biden's healing, it's clear that California has a lot to learn from Tennessee, regardless of who they voted for in the presidential election. And your vision for Caltrain is just for Caltrans is just totally inspiring. And I know a lot of folks on this Zoom are really excited to sort of support you and to help you deliver on all these incredibly important goals. I wanted to specifically give a big thanks to Uber as well for their sponsorship this evening of this event, and as well as to our co-hosts, Transform, Bay Area Council, Seamless Bay Area, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and Vision Zero Network for co-presenting. We work with them closely. They help shape the questions, and I know they also do incredible work on transportation. So thank you all for coming. You'll be able to get a recording of this Zoom if you want to watch it several times or share it with your colleagues. And we'll send that out to you when it's posted. And Director, thank you so much again. And we're just thrilled for your leadership, which is so needed right now. Thank you.
Excellent work, Nick. Glad to have been a part of it. Thanks to you and the SPUR team, and to Uber. Glad to be a part of the conversation. Keep pushing along on these items, on the things that we discussed. I think we can get there. I think we have to keep them front burner, and we'll achieve a lot of the goals that we want to achieve together. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. Okay, Good night, everyone.
Thank you.